Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are back today to continue our coverage from last week on the shooting death of Renee Goode, as well as a more broad conversation about ICE operating in Minnesota. We will break down some updates about the incident that led to Goode's death, the civil litigation case, and the fallout in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Next, we will get into some recent poll results to break down what voters around the country think about it all. Then we will have a larger conversation about ICE in Minnesota as part of Operation Metro Surge. We will break down the lawsuit to stop the surge of federal agents and ICE activity in Minnesota, as well as the judge's initial ruling. We'll break down Walz's primetime speech from Wednesday night and Trump's threat of sending troops into Minnesota. We will then discuss some of the horrific violent criminals that have been apprehended and deported recently. And we will get into some of the hard-to-watch videos of brutal force and overall ICE tactics. We will break down the protests, attacks at the hotel ICE agents were staying at, and get into both safe and unsafe ways to protest. We have all of this and more to break down today. It's hard, it's heavy, and sometimes it's heartbreaking, but we will do our best to share what we know and also how we feel about it. Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the show. So there is a lot to cover, Michael. This is obviously going to be an ongoing conversation. We had a great episode last week with Julius and John Rouleau. So if you haven't listened to that, please be sure to go back and listen, watch that conversation. Gets a little emotional and passionate, but I think that reflects where people stand on this. I think there are a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions from folks left, right, and center on this. And we're going to kind of chat about some of that and more later. So be sure to go check that out. I want to start by saying, just kind of addressing some of the updates that we've seen as it relates to the shooting death of Renee Goode last week and the incident that we kicked off and covered heavily in our recent episode. There's not a ton we know. We know an investigation is going on. We know that there are battles about who the federal government is currently managing that or leading that. And there's certainly a lot of controversy about the state not being involved. Currently, the Department of Homeland Security claimed it was justified and that Goode weaponized her vehicle. Minneapolis Mayor Fry has publicly called this, excuse my language, bullshit, and says that the video does not support that account. We also saw this week DHS stated that the agent who was in front of the vehicle or around the vehicle and shot at Goode and killed her was injured and treated and had internal bleeding. Anything I missed on that? Any thoughts about the little information that we have gathered in the last week?
No, I want to echo your statement about last week's podcast episode. I encourage people to listen. I'm really proud of the episode, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on it. You're right. It was passionate. It was tense at times. I don't think that you and I ever try to censor or hinder our guests in any type of way but simultaneously want there to be balanced and respectful conversations. I think Julius Hernandez and John Rouleau, along with yourself and the little that I contributed, did a really good episode, and I'm really proud of it, and I encourage people to listen. I'd like to say, just kind of set the tone for how I'm approaching this today is I'm thinking I might wear two hats more than I have before, which is Republican, homeless Republican, and just Joe Citizen, proud Minnesotan. And as you were going through some of the details of what's developed since last week's shooting, I just want to remind our listeners the position that I took, which is I believe because of the way that information flowed in the aftermath of the shooting, that one way in which I think Minnesota can heal throughout this process is if the BCA and state investigators worked alongside the federal government in this. I want to remind our listeners that I'm not an agent of law enforcement. I'm not deputized by law enforcement. And when I speak about that, I'm not trying to compromise or complicate a law enforcement investigation. I have the utmost respect for jobs that I don't currently have, and I am not a law enforcement officer. That being said, my reasoning for thinking that the BCA or that state investigators should be involved in some way is because of the rhetoric, because of some of the statements that I think bend or break some of the truth. There is a lot of spin and hyperbole. And I think I'm always thinking about how I'm approaching this episode is, what happens when all of this is when this standoff ends. I know it's going to end at some point, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of the fact, but that's going to guide me, because a lot of the decisions that I think need to be made are all about what happens when everything is said and done. And I do believe, because of the statements that were made by the Vice President, Secretary Noem, and others about some of the way they perceive this, my concern is that the public, particularly Minnesotans, are not going to trust a law enforcement investigation into this because of some of the statements that were made, not by the career servants, the civil servants that are doing this investigation. It's by the political heads that have made some of these statements. And so I just want to say that at the onset that I'm going to keep looking through it from that lens, and that I hope that there is a role that the state can play just from a transparency standpoint, but understanding, as I said last week, that this is a jurisdictional mess.
Absolutely. And I think last week I leaned maybe a little too hard into thinking that it was in good hands, and I have come around to thinking that it absolutely seems to make sense that working together on this is the only way to uphold some of that trust and faith from the American people. As we're reading through this, and as our conversation last week, I think really showed that currently where we are, and this is not unique to this situation, but I think it's been expanded because of this situation, is that everybody distrusts somebody, right? It's just, we differ who we distrust. Republicans are distrusting Walz and Fry and Minneapolis leadership and the state agencies. Doesn't help that we were going through this massive fraud situation and everything else. And so there's a lot of distrust there within our state government. And then Democrats obviously are distrusting Trump and Noem and DHS, especially with the very quick reaction of what happened in this incident, when videos seem to maybe conflict with that. And it's less of a maybe left-right trust issue and more of a top-down trust issue, that there's just a lot of issues. And we'll chat about protests a little bit more, but I think that from my perspective is largely why, or maybe a reason why, we're seeing so many people with their phones out wanting to gather their own evidence about some of this stuff, because that trust is just really has eroded. And I think you put it really well. I do hope that there is some sort of collaboration on this as it moves forward, so that whatever the outcome is can have a little bit of weight behind it and a little bit of support from state and federal government.
I agree. Good points. I want to also say one thing. We have seen more of the farther we get away from the incident, some more video has come out, and we've seen this play out in some way. The one thing that I didn't mention last week that I want to make sure I mentioned this week is Renee Goode was shot and killed. And one of the things that really continues to upset me is the lack of medical care that she received right away. That I respect and understand that law enforcement has a very difficult job. But as a member of the public, as a taxpayer, as a citizen of Minnesota, when anyone in authority discharges their weapon, there should be, as quickly as possible, medical aid rendered to the person who was shot. And I think that it's very troubling to know that I think that there was an opportunity to get her some medical treatment faster. I don't know if she would have survived, but I just know that what I see on the video, and we'll talk about it more, is, I think, not a rapid response to render aid to someone who was just shot at.
Yes, I'm sure you've seen the same video I did. There was a neighbor or somebody nearby who was a physician who went over to ICE officers saying, "I am a physician. I have an obligation. I have a duty. Please let me go help." And they said, "Back the F off," right? Or they, in strong language, said, "No, get out of here, not allowed." And to your point, I agree. I don't know that it would have changed the end result here of her losing her life, but it should have been allowed. he was there. He has more medical training. He was somebody with background in medicine that could have assessed the situation, done possibly something. And it again is one of those situations where that trust with this agency erodes from situations like that.
Yes. And I don't know if now is the right time to say it, but I'm just going to say it because I don't want to forget to bring it up. I want to talk for a second about motor vehicles and getting hit by them. In April of 2023, was hit by a vehicle outside my house. And I want to give an example of something that or in some context on something. I have a conceal and carry permit. And when you go to gun trainings, and when you go through those courses, one of the things they talk about is explaining to people the power of a handgun and what happens when you fire it. There's a phrase that gets passed around sometimes is if people could, for lack of a better phrase, get shot when they're doing their training, they'd realize the power they have in their hands. And that's obviously, you can't do that. But people, I think, sometimes misunderstand the force, the power that exists when you have a handgun or when you're using any type of weapon. And it's tough to dial that in and explain that to people without some type of show of force, which you can't obviously do. Motor vehicles contain a tremendous amount of force. And I'm recognizing a couple things here that I'm sad, horrified that Renee Goode was shot. I want to just continually say that. But I want to offer some context on something that there is no comparison. I don't think people adequately understand the force involved in what it feels like to get hit by a motor vehicle. I was hit by a motor vehicle outside my house. I cannot begin to tell you how much I still remember what it felt like to get hit by a car. There is a tremendous amount of force. I don't know to the degree in which this agent was hurt. I will tell you that I think there needs to be some transparency in what occurred to him and some things. Internal bleeding can mean a lot of things. Technically, a bruise is internal bleeding. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, but I just want to say to folks that getting behind a motor vehicle and using that in any type of way in a protest or is significant use of force. A vehicle is not a light thing. It is not a small thing. And we'll get into more about what people should and shouldn't do. But I just want to just acknowledge as the one thing where I can offer a perspective, a motor vehicle is a powerful piece of equipment. That was over 4,000 pound vehicle. I was hit by a comparable size vehicle. And I remember just the sheer force and how much that damaged my body. And I don't know, and this is why I think there needs to be a thorough investigation, because I see videos, we all see videos different, but medical reports and information should come out about the injuries that were sustained. But we get into protests more, we can talk about some of those things. But I just wanted to say, people should not be dismissive of the power what someone has behind the wheel of a motor vehicle when they're navigating around people, because it can be incredibly powerful.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, you sadly have a unique insight into that. And so I think that's important to share. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a little bit more. I think it would be, I agree, good to hear more about what happened to him, his injuries that he may have received. I'm also a little surprised we haven't seen more video or any video, or maybe I've missed it, of the minutes leading up to her vehicle stopped, him circling around and other agents there. I feel like that will probably come out in an investigation. And I think, like you said, we'll let investigators do their job on this.
Since we're on the point of videos, can you and I agree that ICE agents should have body cameras?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, ICE agents should have body cameras. And
yes.
That is something that is, aside from any reform that is going on here, that needs to be done regarding the role of ICE, where it goes. I think I think every person should agree that ICE agents should be wearing body cameras.
To kind of along those lines, a video came out from Agent Jonathan Ross, who was the one who was in the interaction with Renee Goode. Was that shocking to you that was released, that he took that? I mean, from my perspective, I was a little shocked that the ICE agent had it out. I understand that they're just like other individuals are trying to document them. They're trying to document their interactions probably as well because they don't have body cameras. What were your thoughts on that video?
I understand the need. I'm surprised by the ham-fisted nature of having ICE agents walk around with their own cameras. Body cameras are publicly accessible. I own a body camera. They can be bought on Amazon. And I don't understand the tactical, as someone who's trained with not a law enforcement agent, but someone who's trained and has a carry permit, having other things in your hands. Obviously you have a dominant shooting hand. I think it's important that he did it. I hope there is a good, consistent data retention policy. I hope it's not on the fly. It seemed to be just an iPhone that he was filming as he was walking around. And so I hope there's data retention records that exist and it's done. But the best type of, something should be running at all times, placed there and be able to see that. I think having ICE agents with their own cameras occupying one of their hands, their dominant hand or being their shooting hand or another, I don't think makes a ton of sense. But I think there's a lot about this that doesn't make a ton of sense. Right. And so it was interesting. I also think I was surprised the video came out because to me that shows, again, you're the legal analyst for the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, but I would think that there would be a records retention. A lot of that stuff would be preserved as part of a law enforcement investigation. And my thought process and why it was released is because it was obviously released by someone that got the agent's footage, and they obviously released it because they thought it made the case to justify the shooting. And that's open to interpretation. But the speed in which it came out was pretty fast.
Yeah, it was. I can see where some think that it might help the case. I can also see where it could hinder. I mean, from my personal, and this is again just me, I'm not a trained official or trained agent by any means
yet,
but when I'm on my phone filming something, I feel like I'm taken out of the situation a little bit, right? Your focus is, you're not, I don't know, I just feel like you don't have the peripheral vision as much. There's just everything kind of changes. And so, and again, I don't attribute this to a fault of him filming. I think that they clearly thought that there was a reason that they needed to document this situation and license plate and vehicle and interaction. I just question whether, I will be interested to see how this ties into the case and what experts deduce from the footage and what it shows.
But to your point, what I noticed in it was, first of all, I was surprised about the fact that they don't have body cameras. Number two, I think about, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to what they're, but I think about like when you're a parent taking a video of, your kids or something, it's tough to do the video and get good video while you're doing it. That's why it's good to have, the body camera stationary on the chest, and you can film, and then it's rolling and you can have both hands and have your full attention to what's going on. I think that when you're holding a camera and while you're simultaneously juggling a car in front of you, while you then have to make a decision to shift the camera, move your hand over to your shooting hand because it was originally in his right hand and then it went over to his left. Those are all additional decisions that agent has to make that I think could be alleviated by having a body camera. Now, on the flip side, I will say to you something that I don't think is unfair to say. The downside of having body cameras is everything you do is recorded then. And I do wonder if part of the reason why there's not implemented fully wide the use of body cameras is there would be more transparency into some of these tactics and strategies. Not a surprise, I have security cameras outside my house. And when they were installed, the persons that installed them said, just remember, they're recording you too. And it's true.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if I'm a big, I like data, I like the public data, the rights to see things. I want to make sure there's a good records retention policy. But I also, body cameras and the releasing of that footage aids so much in the public's awareness, and they can get that perspective of what these agents are seeing and doing. Again, I approach this from the standpoint is that there's always bad apples everywhere.
Right.
The vast majority of people, I think, are trying to do the right thing, and having that technology brings the public in to the situation so they get to make decisions. And by the way, I'm going to stake a flag on that. We get to make decisions on what this agent did. We get to offer commentary. We get to have analysis. That's the United States of America. And I just want to make sure everyone understands that. I understand that the officer, that they're in life and death situations, but they weren't drafted and they signed up for this. And I try to balance my criticism, but we get to criticize. That is a role that we have. And we just don't have to sit back and everything that these people are doing on both sides, and we'll talk about it, get to be scrutinized, get to be analyzed.
And I have lots of thoughts on it as well that I have been holding back. I know we've chatted a little bit in our messages back and forth over the week, but largely save it all from here. So I am very much looking forward to that conversation. A couple more things I want to mention as it relates to the death of Renee Goode and the cases surrounding that. As Renee Goode's family has hired a firm to pursue civil litigation in connection with her death. They hired the same firm that is known for representing George Floyd's family. The ICE agent responsible for the shooting, Jonathan Ross, has hired Chris Madel, who is running for governor as a Republican. Thoughts? Any?
I'm not surprised that there's litigation already. And Madel is someone that we've talked about on the podcast. We haven't had him on. I hope we can have him on at some point. But he's well respected and he's done some work in terms of defending law enforcement in shootings before. We discussed at length for an episode or two the case involving Trooper Lonergan with the Minnesota State Patrol. Chris Madel was the attorney for Trooper Lonergan. And so I think it adds a dynamic to this. This has already taken on a partisan political tone.
Right.
Not to say there's anything wrong with that. But Madel stepping in, it's going to be interesting to watch because if there's one thing about Chris Madel we know, he's very quotable. And so it'd be very fascinating to watch how this plays out.
Eventually, we will have episodes that are a little bit more political election 2026 in nature, and so we can discuss it further then of whether this will impact good or bad his race, his primary, his endorsement. So we'll be watching that in the wings here and come back to those conversations at some point. Moving on, big, wild, crazy, upsetting news this week was a mass exodus from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, who we have given a lot of praise about and to over the last weeks, he and several prosecutors resigned from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota this week. According to reporting, Thompson and others were refusing to the pressure to pursue an investigation of Goode's widow and was frustrated by the DOJ's lack of willingness to investigate the agent involved. Multiple federal prosecutors also left over similar concerns. Wow, I did not have that on my 2026 bingo card.
Your take?
I think it's disappointing for a multitude of reasons. I think that Thompson has done an incredible job over the last while of articulating and investigating fraud in our state. I think he has been very sharp. I think he has been very targeted. I think he has been very transparent with what he's seeing, what he's finding, and what he knows. I think this is understandable. These are positions that are not supposed to be partisan. They're supposed to be professionals that do the job and investigate and prosecute accordingly, not with a partisan bent. And so feeling as though he was receiving pressure to appease maybe the DOJ, the president's administration, wherever the orders were coming from, there was clearly some sort of pressure, according to reporting as we know it, that to look at this with a specific lens in mind, which violates what he's supposed to do and what he should do and what his office is meant to do. I think it is a huge, huge loss to that office. I think it's a huge loss when we look at the other prosecutors that also left, when we turn our attention back to fraud and other crimes that they have been prosecuting, that they have prosecuted, that they've been successful with. It's really unfortunate.
Yes, I would agree with you. Republicans, and as I disclosed, and I'll continue to disclose, I'm going to be wearing two main hats today. And the hat I'm going to put on is homeless Republican. Republicans were in a very good spot when we were talking about fraud. Joe Thompson is one of the few people who I think went out there and spoke to the public about fraud, had the credibility and the attention of the public. He had the impression of kind of like an Elliot Ness type and respected on both sides of the aisle. But he was the one person who I think related, that was standing behind a podium talking about fraud, that could get the attention of the public, the media, and he was deemed credible. And I think Republicans have lost a very significant voice and a leadership person that, not for partisan reasons, but because of the side that he was on. Joe Thompson was against fraud. We all should be against fraud. But to the degree which Republicans wanted fraud to be front and center in the 2026 election, the departure of Joe Thompson hurts that. It removes it off the front pages more. And that's a problem for Republicans. And then the reasons why he left. Now, in the interest of, wanting to be as fair as they can be, I think the Attorney General went out and later said that they were terminated. But it's a distinction with some that may think is a difference. But I think Joe Thompson and some of those other attorneys need to speak up and clear the air a bit. This has largely been reported by the New York Times and other media outlets, not with on-the-record sources. And normally I'm not opposed to off-the-record background or quoting in that type of way. Don't get me on wrong. Don't think that that's my argument. I think that Joe Thompson asserted himself with such a strong voice on the matter of fraud that he himself should clarify as to the reasons why he left, what were the basis of them, and make sure everyone understands this, because this is really bad. Again, as someone who wants to see this state heal, but also, again, putting on that partisan hat, fraud was great. Fraud was good for Republicans to talk about. It's a good issue for them to talk about. They need to come up with solutions. They need to have answers, and that's something I've expressed some frustration with. But the fraud issue is a 95-5 issue. And the removal of Joe Thompson, or the exodus of Joe Thompson from the U.S. Attorney's Office, for whatever the reason, makes it more difficult for fraud to become front and center in this election cycle, which I think Republicans desperately wanted and need.
Concur. Well said. I also think, kind of along the political lens of this, we talked about last week how Walz came out and said that Thompson should resign, or get fired. He has defamed me, meaning Walz. He pivoted. He this week called him a principled public servant and a huge loss for our state. This is where the trust is, right? Like, just a week ago, you said that this man was responsible for your defamation and he should lose his job because of it. And now you're praising him. I understand why, because this helps his narrative, because now we're also, Walz has condemned Trump for essentially pushing him out, despite the fact that Walz was trying to do that a week ago. It just is like, come on, man.
This is an example of where I've said before, consistency is the hobgoblin of a small mind, but simultaneously, you can't have it both ways. And this is something I think, and I will just say this, the Trump era has brought in, and it's been done on both sides. There is literally no consistency on things. And one day you're calling for him to resign, should be terminated, and the next we're going to build a statue of him, and he should be canonized. You can't have it both ways. And I understand the partisanship of all of this, but again, I think it's ridiculous. And we're going to talk more about. I have some additional commentary about some of the rhetoric and some of the statements that have been made by Walz, but this is one that I was quite frustrated with on the consistency.
I do want to kind of shift us a little bit away from the death of Renee Goode and cases surrounding that, and a little bit more towards ICE in general. By also having a little way to bridge that by discussing some new polling. Anything else? Any final thoughts on what we know or what we expect to see as it relates to the investigation around the tragic death of Renee Goode?
I just want to remember to keep staking the flag, which is I'm not a law enforcement agent. I'm not a career bureaucrat. I think for the good of the state, federal and state agencies should investigate it. Together, there should be cooperation. That's my position.
I love it. I'm going to start here with a Quinnipiac poll. Just over 1,000 registered voters were surveyed from the 8th to the 12th. So following this shooting, overall, 82% of Americans surveyed had seen the video of the shooting. 8 and 10. That is incredible in this day and age, but not surprising because we know how huge it has been. Overall, we're going to break down a little bit on the party lines and gender, but as a whole, 53% of those registered voters polled said that they did not think the shooting was justified. 35% said that they think it was justified, and 12% did not offer an opinion. When we look at the party lines, it is, I would say, about what we expect here. When it comes to Republicans, 77% thought the shooting was justified, with 10% thinking not. For Democrats, 92% said it was not justified, with just 4% saying it was justified. And independents, 59% said not justified, with 28% saying justified. Anything stand out to you there?
It is amazing to me how, and just a reminder to our listeners that no one in the podcast industry does a better job with scripts than Becky. The fact that 82% of people have seen that video, and it's people, depending on partisan affiliation, view the video entirely differently.
Yeah.
It blows my mind. And for Republicans, putting on that hat again, I would be concerned about the 59% independents.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is huge, because not only is it 59 saying not justified, but then when you flip it, only 28% said it was justified, is large. I mean, and we'll kind of get into it about some of the numbers surrounding ICE in general, but this is an issue, and it's clear that it's becoming an issue on the political side, as it obviously is already an issue in life in general. Gender breakdown was a little interesting to me. When we look at men, 42% said was justified to 44% saying not justified. So about split. When it comes to women, only 30% said it was justified, while 61% said not justified. So men about split down the middle. Women, a third said it was justified. 2/3 said not justified.
What's your take on that?
Putting on my feminist woman hat, I think the video that we saw from the ICE officer's angle, where he calls her the B word, I think that is part that plays into this. I think that women, to go on a little rant aside from ICE and politics, if you've seen anything, lately, there's been a lot of stories, a lot of TikToks, a lot of videos about women and their safety when you walk down the street, when you're interacting with men. There's, I don't know if you've heard the story of, would you rather be in a room with a bear or be in the woods? Would you rather encounter a bear or a man? And a lot of women say they'd rather take their chances with a bear. And I think that there is just an issue with where women feel when it comes to general safety with some men, and with some men in power and authority. And I think that in this situation, I would attribute that to some woman feeling if they put themselves in Renee Goode's shoes, I'm not saying this is where I stand, but I think that this is where I would assume some of these women, if they put themselves in her shoes, she is surrounded by men with authority who are shouting commands at her, regardless of what she's shouting back and what she feels, that maybe there's a little balance of or imbalance in power there, and that they don't feel that was justified because of that, is my simple take. I haven't done a poll of any feminist friends or women out there about that, but I think it just, to me, goes back to a larger conversation about women and women's safety in particular, as they interact with men, and especially aggressive men of power.
That's a very good points. I will just put it bluntly. Shooting a woman in the face and then calling her a fucking bitch after you shoot her is not good. It's just not. And I don't know what more I can say.
Yeah. We will just continue on with some of these numbers here. When polled, again, this is the Quinnipiac poll, when polled about ICE in general, 40% of voters approve of the way ICE is enforcing immigration laws. Again, just a reminder, this is not just Minnesota voters. This is a nationwide poll. 57% approve or disapprove, and this is kind of largely unchanged since the poll that they released July 16th, 2025. When we look at the party lines, 84% of Republicans approve, 12 disapprove of the way ICE is enforcing. Democrats break down 94 disapprove to 4 approve, and independents, again, going back to the issue here, independents 64% disapprove, with only 33% approving of the way ICE is enforcing immigration laws.
So there is no polling that shows that in the aftermath of this shooting, looking at it from a partisan perspective, there is no polling data that you've seen that shows that Republicans are doing better in the aftermath of this shooting.
No, not at all. When we look at 2 other polls here, that actually so you had sent me an Axios article from this morning called "Trump's Immigration Erosion Worries His Team." Talks about how some recent polling, internal polling, as well as 2 other polls that pointed to CNN poll and a YouGov poll, both conducted since the shooting. They show that shows support for his immigration policies are falling. It said some Trump advisors quietly are talking about recalibrating the White House's approach, though it's unclear what changes Trump would embrace. And as you mentioned, that this really shows kind of an erosion of the independent, moderate, minority voters who were a key part of his victory. And of course, as we talk about that, every decision in policy also has a political implication, and they're seeking to keep their House majority. And this article also mentions that they risk, if they lose the House, that he will potentially face a 3rd impeachment attempt. So these polls mean a lot.
One of the things that we talked about during the election and in the aftermath is I think the Trump administration was honest about what they were going to do related to immigration. I think you and I and others said, I don't know how realistic that is. And so there's a part of me that's like, he's doing what he said, but just because you say, I mean, it's very clear that the policy that he has, that in the way it's being implemented is not going to help out Republicans. It's being done in such a blunt way that it is not going to help Republicans out, or again, the state. Again, balancing wearing those hats. And I'm going to be more partisan in this episode and wearing that hat because I'm leading up to something. But again, this is not good. Because if you think about it, because I believe what's good for the state can also be good for Republicans in the state. But this is not good. The one thing I'd also want to remind our listeners is that, the last president to sign immigration reform was Ronald Reagan. So that's how long this has been going on. I bet you weren't even alive when Reagan was president. You were, weren't you?
I was born in 86.
I'm sorry. I was going to probably say my longest swear word there. I was joking when I said that. And then, boy, I caught myself because my mom does listen occasionally. Whew. You barely caught the last. I caught the last year and a half of Nixon. You just barely made it for Reagan.
Yeah.
Well, that's depressing. Let me just say this. So again, that's how long this has been going on. Is that the last president to sign any type of comprehensive immigration reform was Ronald Reagan. And so that puts in context how long ago this has been an issue. And again, just to button that up and push back if you think I'm wrong, this was part of the RNC's platform.
Mhm.
This was part of Trump's agenda. He said he was going to do this. And so if I can just bring it back locally for a second, Mary Moriarty talked about things that she was going to do during the election that people, and she still won.
Mhm.
And so Trump is doing some of those unpopular things, but I just think there's a smarter way to do this, which we can talk about. But I think the larger point I want to make for Republicans is there's not one piece of polling data that shows that on this issue of ICE, immigration, how this is being carried out, and I'm not getting into the polling about Renee Goodman because I don't want to dehumanize the situation. But Republicans aren't coming out ahead in any of this. You know what that means? Maybe do something different, which we'll talk about.
Yes, as you said, he did say this, and it was one of those things like Mexico's going to pay for the wall, right? Like in my mind, mass deportations, rounding them all up and sending them home, it was just kind of an eye roll thing that I thought he saw, but he said it and he's doing it. So it is what it is.
Can I go back to something for a quick second?
Sure.
I just want to just dial down on this because it's been bouncing around my head. If you see a bear in the wood, be careful.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't be dismissive of a bear in the wood. Do you have bear spray?
I don't. I don't spend a lot of time in the woods.
Okay.
I don't know if that surprises you about me.
I spent just a little bit amount. And as someone who's in the woods, yes. So just be mindful of bears.
Yeah. Thank you. Just briefly, some of these other numbers from this poll or these polls. CNN, again, this was a not registered voters, just a national sample of 1,200 adults. Just 51 to 31% say ICE enforcement actions are making cities less safe than safer. So majority think that ICE makes cities less safe, something that we've seen Mayor Fry also say. And 37% of the public express a great deal or moderate trust in the federal government to carry out a fair and thorough investigation. When we look at the YouGov poll, 56% of Americans think that both the federal government and Minnesota state government should be responsible for investigating that shooting. What you were talking to, only 21% say that only the federal government and only 15% say only the Minnesota government. So 56% say they both should be involved, and less than a third think it should be one versus the other.
Explain where you think all this polling should lead people.
To a kumbaya. I don't want to be obviously Pollyannish and thinking that there's going to be some massive kumbaya, but I think that both sides are looking at this polling. Both sides are seeing this and having conversations within their parties, within their electeds, within their leaders on how we get out of this, because we know there's going to have to be some sort of deal struck. We know it's not just going to simply be they round up another 1,000 people and pack up their bags and leave, right? Like something's going to need to happen. And I do want to, after we get through some of it, I think we need to focus on that conversation, because I think a solution needs to happen. I think it's going to be largely political, as much as we don't always love the politics of politics. But I think that is going to be a big part of it, because there's a lot at risk for if some decision does not get made.
Got it. I agree with you.
Do you have any massive?
No, I just, as you were going through the polling data, it was just one after the other, just a realization that there's a path here, but it's a political path. And I will say again that I get concerned about some of the gleefulness that I see some of the Republicans are talking about this, because it's interesting to me being gleeful in a situation where the polling doesn't show that. And one of the things that I very much have always appreciated about having a podcast with you, because it reflects, I think, I always like to go to the data. I always want to go to where the public is, because again, we're having this conversation all in the context of politics. And that's what we're analyzing this on. You and I don't host a true crime podcast or an immigration-based policy podcast. You and I are breaking this down in the standpoint of what does this mean for Minnesotans and what does this mean politically? And the data that you've produced in the script is just overwhelming to me to show that I don't see a situation where if this goes on, Republicans come out ahead in any form of way.
Yes. Kind of shifting us into, again, ICE in Minnesota. One last number I want to share is that just ICE's net approval rating during Trump's first term, it was neutral. It was at 0 points. Today it is negative 17.
Oof.
That is a really, really large swing, especially if this is something that is going to continue in Minnesota, around the country. It does not surprise me that there's a recalibration and conversations within the White House of how to move forward and what to do here, because this, in the words of Mayor Fry, is not sustainable. It's not sustainable in general. It's obviously not sustainable for Trump, especially with midterms obviously historically being hard for the party in power and for the president's party. And so,
Yep.
But in my bleak opinion, I think it has potential to get worse before it gets better.
I agree with you on that.
So when we look and turn to Minnesota, earlier this week, we saw a press conference with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, Mayor Jacob Fry of Minneapolis, St. Paul's new mayor, Scherr. They filed a federal lawsuit seeking to stop the surge of DHS and ICE agents here in Minnesota. They argued that the operation is unprecedented, unconstitutional, and unlawfully disrupted, violating the 10th and First Amendment and federal administrative laws. We had an initial court ruling this week. The federal judge declined to issue a temporary restraining order, is currently allowing ICE to continue operation while legal arguments proceed. And the judge said the issues raised in the lawsuit at hand are important, but wants to see more evidence and testimony before a final ruling. Any thoughts on all of that?
Well, I want to defer to you. You're the legal analyst. What's your take on it?
I'm impressed that the initial ruling came back so quickly. I think it is, I appreciate, and I don't know if this is something you said to me or who, I appreciate a attempt at something to be done, right? Like, it's not just going up there and saying, go the F home. It's some sort of thoughtful plan or solution or attempt to address the situation that they're displeased with.
I think you're spot on. I agree with you. I think that there are levers that the city, the county, and the state can implement and do and try. And I think it's important, other than, I think you said it precisely, rather than just saying get the F out and having people go out and protest, there are maneuvers and legal things and bureaucratic things, procedural things that can be done by cities, counties, and states in an attempt to curtail some of this activity. And I'm glad that they are exploring them, because I'm not a lawyer. I defer to you and to others about the legal merits, but I agree with precisely what you said, Becky. It shows that they're doing something, and I want to see that.
Continuing on this week, we heard from Governor Walz. He did a primetime 7 p.m. address from his office talking about the escalating tensions. He called for peace and calm. Also criticized the nature and scale of the federal response. He was quoted as saying, telling Minnesotans that the desire to get out and protest and speak up is a patriotic duty, but needs to be done so safely. Encourage them to carry their phones to capture activities, to increase transparency, have a record of these things. And then did a lot of talking about how elections have consequences and bringing this passion and fight to the ballot box. Initial thought from you, I'm in particular curious about your take, because you have watched a lot of Walz. You've supported him on some things, not on others. What was your thought on his tone, on his demeanor, and on his message in this speech?
I didn't like it. I didn't like the tone. I didn't like the presentation. I don't think there was a need for him to speak to it, and I don't think it's helpful. I am becoming less and less of a fan of a lot of people's rhetoric in this fight. And I think that some people need to, as I've said, log off, get off social media, and stop formulating policy and talking points around social media. which is a national public radio. I'll link to it in this episode, the notes. I commented on a story about some of the policy things. And I listened to that speech, and I don't know what the purpose of it was. And on the flip side, as I said to some elected officials this week, Republicans need to be responding to this stuff quickly, very quickly, and engaging on this stuff. There needs to be some balance in some of these conversations, because I have a lot of concerns with his speech and what he gave and what he talked about. And we'll talk about it more in some of the protest stuff. But I don't know that there was a need for it. And I think it escalates tensions. And I want to talk about that more, but I wanted to answer your question directly, and I think I did.
Yep,
I was
absolutely
not a fan of it.
Shortly after that, we saw another incident with an ICE-involved shooting in North Minneapolis. This was, as reports have said, a Venezuelan man was shot in the leg after an alleged confrontation involving a shovel, and multiple participants, what I've gathered and saw, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this because I've been seeing and reading a lot, but there was an attempted traffic stop, a flee, a follow, arrival at a location, I don't know if it was a house or apartment building, where the individual ran towards the home, others ran out with a shovel and a broom and tried to attack or interfere with the potential arrest and detainment of this Venezuelan illegal immigrant, and he was shot in the leg, and it then erupted into a pretty massive protest in North Minneapolis. Did I get the bullet points of that as you know it?
And the bullet points, yes, very good.
Ooh, sorry, that was I don't know that I should.
Oh, I know what you meant. No, I wasn't. Okay. No. Oh, I see what you're saying. It wasn't a pun
intended.
No. I didn't mean it that way either.
So DHS has released some of the information about that. There were 3 illegal aliens that they say attacked that ICE agent in Minneapolis, leading to the shooting. They highlight that they are all Venezuelan illegal immigrants who were caught and released at the border by the Biden administration. They go into some of the different crimes: driving without a license, arrested for 2 counts of giving false name. He was the subject of the targeted enforcement operation. And he was released previously by Minnesota authorities before ICE could even lodge a detainer. And then there were 2 other individuals that failed to show up for the hearing, who were entered in the United States under the Biden administration, which was pointed out in this information from DHS.
Not
good. We then saw a press conference with Chief O'Hara of the police department and Mayor Fry. O'Hara called for the protesters to go home, cites attacks towards law enforcement and labels it as unlawful assembly. They said that they were throwing fireworks. It got pretty rowdy. I do want to say that this, from kind of what you had said about Walz' speech and this, both Fry and O'Hara encouraged people to go home. That is not something that we got from Walz' speech. I understand, and we'll chat a little bit more about First Amendment rights and peaceful protest and stuff. It did feel as though Walz gave permission a little bit for folks to, not that they need permission, obviously there's First Amendment rights do exist, but I did appreciate this from the chief and from Mayor Fry following this shooting.
Yes, and I think the contrast in leadership could not be different.
Yes.
It could not be more stark.
Then there was a kind of a sad situation that unfolded with a father who 6 kids were apparently attempting to get into their car and leave. He is on videos claiming that he made eye contact or told ICE that he was trying to leave. Allegedly, a flashbang was detonated or sent near or under his car, detonated his airbags. Tear gas filled the car with the 6 kids inside. Multiple of them had to be taken by ambulance, including a young baby, an infant, who supposedly stopped breathing and was taken by ambulance. From what I understand, they are all recovering. I don't know if they've been released. They are, though, okay. But tragic part of this protest that spun out of this, that was going on, the interactions, and a lot. It's just a lot.
I spoke to some people about this when the reports, you and I were sharing some text messages as this was going on. And one of the concerns that I raised to some people is there was a baby that was gassed. And I heard from the canned response I got from a number of Republicans was, what was the baby doing at a protest? And I'm like, really? This is this is not unfold. This battlefield is in neighborhoods. And people are getting swept up into this. We'll talk more about the protests. But I have a wife and kids. You have a husband and kids. If there was a situation unfolding in your neighborhood, getting into a van or getting into a vehicle and attempting to flee and not staying inside your house might be a decision that you would make. And can we just pause for a second and just say that under no circumstance should there be a baby gassed in a situation? Now, I want to just stake a flag on something because I reminded people about this. There have been protests before in the Twin Cities where children will attend. I have written, when I wrote for the Star Tribune, I wrote about a concern about bringing children to a protest. I'm not trying to give parental advice. Nobody wants that for me. But I certainly wouldn't be bringing children to a situation like this. And my frustration with it is I don't think that there's any evidence that the story that this gentleman was saying isn't true. Again, this
he
isn't
shows his
happening.
vehicle with the
Yes.
airbags exploded.
And I could see a situation, and I go back to, us being parents. And I would say this, Becky, if there was something in your neighborhood, I can't imagine you and your husband not trying to either you stay in the house, do you get out? What do you do? I would make the exact same decision.
Mm-hmm.
And for people's reaction to be like, well, you shouldn't bring a baby to a protest. Oh, come on.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have that position.
I think that this highlights part of that I don't think people are always think. It's certainly something that I hadn't had the full rounded scope of when I think of those protests, or all those people that live around there and their cars that are on the streets, and especially in areas like this where a lot of houses have street parking. Like when I lived in St. Paul, I parked on the street. I parked on the street in front of my house. This is where they park their cars, where they live. And just the noise, the smoke, the anger. We saw a lot of attacks on agents' vehicles and some other disruptive or damage to vehicles in the area. And yeah, it's just really sad.
A frequent guest of our podcast, Julius Hernandez, who was on last week, lives in that exact neighborhood. And again, when I saw that minivan with the airbags deployed, I didn't get any sense from that father that what he's saying wasn't true. And this is the type of the manner in which this is being conducted is going to sweep people up into this. People who are there people that are going to, is it dragging out protesters? Of course it is. But innocent people are going to get swept up into this. And I don't think that there's any information which said that the parents were trying to bring their kids to a protest. But other than they were trying to just do the thing that I think any parent would do, including you and me, which is to get our kids out of there.
Yes. I want to jump over and then back to protests, but continuing along, we saw the lawsuit from some of our elected officials here. We saw Waza's statement and speech, and now we have a threat from President Trump. Following all of this, in the last 48 hours, President Donald Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act if local authorities can't control the unrest targeting ICE agents. And little research from all of the articles I've read on this. And the Insurrection Act of 1807 is a rare statute that allows a U.S. president to deploy troops or federalize the National Guard within the United States during rebellion, insurrection, or obstruction of federal duties. Typically, this is invoked when a state or local authority requests the help, but apparently certain provisions allow action even without the request. They claim that the protest and confrontation justify stronger federal action, including potential use of military force to protect ICE personnel. And yeah, this is seems like a lot.
The Insurrection Act is not a small thing. Last done in 1992. The George Herbert Walker Bush did it to quell some of the LA riots in the aftermath of Rodney King. And it was only done after the governor of California, Republican at the time, Pistol Pete Wilson, who I've met before, requested the president to do it. There were, $1 billion plus in damage going on at that time. There was over 60 people killed. I don't think that there's any comparable situation in Minneapolis that would justify the calling of the insurrection or the president issuing or invoking, the right word is the Insurrection Act. I think it would be an absolute mess if he did it. I don't think that there is a justification to do it. And if the president invokes the Insurrection Act, Republicans won't win anything in this state for a very long time.
Yes, it seems unlikely, but I don't even like the threat of it. It just seems...
Is it unlikely?
I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't know. No, probably not.
I would put it at 50-50.
Oh. Wow.
I would put it at 50-50. If we got a breaking alert during this podcast that he invoked the Insurrection Act, I would not be surprised.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I do want to point to a new group here that you are the Minnesota State Chair of, recently announced, called Our Republican Legacy. You put out a statement. I'd like you to chat a little bit through this group, your involvement, and this statement and stance on this.
Yes, we can talk about the group. I'd like to talk about it more in a later episode because this is our podcast and we get to do that sometimes. But I am the state chair of an organization called Our Republican Legacy. It is a coalition of Republicans across this country and in Minnesota here who believe in that there is a need for a Republican Party, a vibrant Republican Party. And we need to be thinking about what the party will be in the aftermath of Donald Trump not being the president and looking towards 2026 into 2028. Our Republican Legacy issued a statement on the possibility of the president invoking the Insurrection Act. And I was proud to be a part of that statement and have it released. I got to just say this to Republicans out there. One of the things that when I was a Republican for Harrison Walz, and as you mentioned appropriately, I did support Walz in 2022, but one of the issues that I talked about when I was a Republican for Harrison Walz was about democracy and the need for having some our constitutional guardrails. And I got to tell you something. I don't know the last time the Republicans read the Constitution that are advocating for the Insurrection Act to be invoked. There's a difference between the president having the authority to do it and him doing it. There's a difference between him wanting to do it and there being a justifiable case for it. I think President Trump looks for any opportunity to show that he has power and force behind him. I do not believe that there is a justifiable case for the president to invoke the Insurrection Act. I think it violates a number of core principles that Republicans believe in. Limited government. It undermines, I think, local control. I think it sets a very dangerous precedent where a president can deploy troops for somewhat political purposes. And remember, this is the United States military. This is the United States military on the streets of this state. I'm going to say something that may shock you. The quickest way for me to go and be on the streets is if the president invokes the Insurrection Act. I believe that strongly in it. And I look forward to the next portion of our discussion on this podcast talking about protests and peaceably assembling. But there is not a case, I think, to be made that there's a justifiable. First of all, let me just say again, the president can invoke it. He has that authority. I am not questioning whether the president can invoke the Insurrection Act. I would say to you, based on what I've observed, what I've read, what I've learned, and what I've heard from other people saying, this is a very weak case for him to do it. Number two, I think it violates a number of principles that Republicans traditionally have supported. I will also say to you that if the president invokes the Insurrection Act and the United States military is brought into Minnesota or to Minneapolis, that will be what I will call an extinction level event for Republicans.
Mhm.
And that language, if you're a movie watcher, there's a movie called Deep Impact, and where it's about a meteor hitting the Earth, and it's an extinction level event. It's like when the meteor hit and wasted all the dinosaurs. That's what will happen to Republicans. Will be no when once the United States military is on the streets, it's over with. And I have not heard, aside from a bunch of dumbass influencers wanting to gas the situation, there is not a Republican core principle that it makes sense to me, aside from all the legal justifications. One last time, I know the president can do it. That doesn't mean he should.
Agreed. I think it also kind of goes towards our goal of seeking some sort of coordination, and bringing tensions down is a better way to address the targeting of ICE. Yes. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
I don't know what else to say. I want to be optimistic. It's not going to happen.
I'm with you there, Becky. I don't want to see my relatives in the United States military on the streets of Minneapolis.
Jointly, or in addition, we saw a paper come out from the White House about Minnesota's sanctuary defiance has consequences. It says, as President Donald Trump delivers on the promise that secured his overwhelmingly re-election, Minnesota leaders have chosen defiance over partnership. It goes into the fact that the state's Democrat politicians have repeatedly boasted their so-called sanctuary status, encouraged resistance, and smeared ICE officers. It says the responsibility for enhanced enforcement operations in Minnesota and the tension and violence lies squarely with these officials who refuse to partner with the Trump administration and instead put their radical left agenda over public safety and the rule of law. And then it goes into quotes from Walz and Ellison and Fry and Omar and on and on and on about sanctuary cities and upholding sanctuary cities.
I'd like to get your take on the White House doing that. I want your take on all this stuff, but I sent that to you for a reason. I wanted to get your take on it.
You know me, I'm not also a super big Trump supporter. This, I think, is good. I liked this. Before I expound on that, did you agree? Do you like this?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I want to hear, I want to give you I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to make sure I was very curious what your take was on this.
This kind of goes back to what I talked about a little bit on our last episode, is the situation that we're dealing with of hundreds, if not thousands, of illegal criminal immigrants on our streets, is due to the lack of prosecution by Mary Moriarty and others, the lack of upholding our laws, enforcing our laws, and making people who break laws pay the price for breaking those laws, for being in jail, for being deported. It stems from that, in my perspective. I think that a lot of this issue also comes from the lack of coordination. I've seen a little bit. Pat Garofalo has tweeted. Lois Olson was on the radio talking about how the lack of coordination is why we're seeing here what is not going on in places like California and Michigan or Wisconsin, because in those areas, elected officials are doing some level of coordination with ICE and federal agents on this. DHS in Minnesota has called on Walz and Fry to cooperate with the 1,360 detainers of criminal illegal immigrants in custody. They also say that Minnesota has released nearly 500 illegal immigrants. Blois talked about on the radio how Governor Whitmer in Michigan said, "What do you need?" And I said, "We have a list. We would like your help arresting these fugitives and violent criminals." They coordinated. They didn't have this issue. He even says that in California, he talks about how they had a number of folks that were already in jail, that the local authorities or state authorities handed over to ICE of violent, illegal criminals that are in the state illegally, in this country illegally, that they coordinated and said, here are folks that are already detained. We will work together and they can be deported. That's not happening here in Minnesota. And that to me is a huge issue. There are people in jail currently who have committed crimes, who are here illegally, that ICE is saying, let's work together to solve this problem and get these criminals off the street. And this is where I don't get what I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about ICE and what they're doing in Minnesota. But this is where I really struggle to see why Ellison and Fry and Walls and her and Moriarty just would prefer these people to stay in the state, to stay in the country, to commit further crimes, to be a strain on our prison system, on our judicial system, on our state as a whole. Raping, molesting, murdering, attacking. I don't get it. I don't get it.
I completely in agreement with you. The reason why I wanted you to see it was because I believe, again, one of the most profound points that you've made on this podcast was about talking about how Republicans message on storytelling. That document tells a story. And I think I have noticed a shift in some of the communication strategies from the White House, from the Department of Homeland Security and ICE related to what's going on in the state. And that, I think, white paper represents laying a foundation as to why this is going on. If this can be a policy discussion about those issues and we can debate immigration policy, that's a good issue for Republicans to debate on. And we should talk about that. But when we're talking about babies getting gassed, there's no room for that to happen. When we're
There's no
talking
coming
about
back from that.
yes, that's an extinction level event. And so I viewed that document as a reflection of the thesis that you've presented as to how Republicans tell stories. And I was excited because I'll also go back to this. I'm looking, it's that effect of I'm seeing it now and I'm realizing how profound of a statement was when you made it. I also want to go back to something when we had John Rouleau on. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I'm going to tell you something. If John Rouleau was the spokesman for what was going on in this state related to ICE, this would be an entirely different political argument. And I'm not trying to deputize John Rouleau to be the ICE spokesman, but him going out and saying, I got a lot of positive feedback on last week's episode, both from Julius and from John. But not to play favorites, but John articulated, and has always articulated on this show, just a simple, reasonable messaging point. And the more John Rouleau's points are elevated, that's the only hope for Republicans in this fight. I'm not trying to get him drafted, but I'm just going to say to you, you see my point is that—
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's some of that. Reason why I think John's doing it makes sense is because it goes to your larger point. For Republicans to win this policy debate, they need to tell stories. Because you want to know the story that's pretty difficult to compete with right now is the baby getting gassed. And the more that people are going out there and talking like John Rouleau is and are telling the type of stories and laying the type of groundwork and background information that you've suggested and discussed, this can be a policy debate where there is a platform, at least for Republicans to succeed. But when we're talking about this civil unrest that we're seeing right now, and you have national people saying, and you have some Minnesota chuckles who just want to gas the situation, who probably couldn't spell Insurrection Act, calling it for it to be done, that's not where this is going to be solved. Storytelling, responsible policy discussions, and elevating a voice like John Rouleau's, who really dialed in on some of the specifics, that is where there can be more of a responsible messaging on what ICE is doing in this state.
100%, because I do think that's what we're losing here, right? We're, instead of focusing on the Fox 9 article, right, came out about some of these worst of the worst, the 212 illegal immigrants who are considered the worst of the worst. Here are some of their crime breakdown. When we look at violent crime, which is homicide, assault, domestic violence, or gang affiliation, 75 people they took off the street that are associated with either gangs, homicide, assault, or domestic violence. When it comes to sex offenses, rape, criminal sexual conduct, 28 of them. When we look at fraud, theft, illegal reentry, or trafficking, 45. Drugs, 57. DWI, 7. ICE stated this week that they arrested 13 members of the world's most dangerous criminal gangs, including some of MS-13. That's something I would think that majority of people can get behind. And to know that there's some level of criminal, again, maybe from anywhere from DWI up to violent crime, of those 1,300 individuals that are detained, that the state's not working to get out of here, that's the issue to me, is then how, when we look at the whole ICE is making the cities less safe, are you kidding? So are these people.
Correct.
And I'm not, and I want to say that I'm not saying that ICE is making our cities safer, but I'm saying if that's your argument, then what do you say to this? How do you argue that keeping these people here, not working with the federal authorities to get them out of here, is to the benefit of people like me and
You're
people
exactly
like
right.
you?
And that is exactly why I think that's where I think because that's where I think where most Minnesotans would agree. And I think that's the opportunity, is if we could target those individuals and get them out, this could be a situation where it could be much more manageable. Like you mentioned, Blois had discussed regarding Governor Whitmer. But that part of that situation isn't going to happen because, and this gets into, we can talk about, we'll get more into solutions, but again, that narrative storytelling, it hasn't broken through. And I understand why. I understand when this is unfolding. I'm not saying I agree with it, but when this is unfolding on city streets, there's so many aspects that the media wants to just focus on. And I think it's a challenge for Republicans to get that message out when the administration is using the type of incendiary rhetoric that they are. That's the missed opportunity. And we'll talk more about that, but the narrative storytelling, because right now, what the data that you have discussed, that John has discussed, if that were to break through, and if that's where ICE could be focused, this would be a different discussion. But as long as minivans and are getting gassed, there is no hope for the city to come together, the state to come together, or for Republicans to succeed.
All right. So continuing on of what I think I would like to see and what I would hope to happen, and I appreciate the White House putting that out, and I want the state to work with them and that to be where ICE focuses. I think we have, what is hard for me currently is the optics of what is going on and what we are seeing. Obviously, beyond optics, it's what actually is going on in some of these situations. And I'm not saying that we see everything. I'm not saying that the footage that we see has the full story of what is happening, the individual that's being detained or arrested. What I will say is, for me, it has been hard to look away from, but also hard to look at. There's been a lot of really tough tackles and arrests and people being dragged from their cars, ICE agents kind of going head on, pulling people out, breaking their windows, tackling them being limp and being carried to a car. We've seen an incident inside of a Target where a worker was detained. We have seen incidents near schools. We have seen traffic stops and all sorts of different things where it has been really, really hard to see federal agents act in this way. And to me, again, I personally oppose illegal immigrant, but I think that it's going too far. I think that I feel like the polls are showing this. I think that public safety obviously is at the forefront of what we should do. But where I struggle is, and I think that we see some of this when I want to talk about protests. I think some of this is there, but that also goes a little too far. Is we're supposed to be a melting pot of a nation, and pride ourselves on folks being here and welcoming folks and all of that. Doesn't mean open borders. We do need to address their broken immigration system. I don't think that this is the way to do so, but more so, Republicans always tout being a nation of laws, that we are a nation of laws, and those laws deserve and need to be upheld and enforced. I struggle with how, and again, I'm not the expert here of how all this works and why they can do the way they do and why they can conduct these arrests and detainments the way they do. But I struggle with kind of like the due process of it all, and the optics again of the videos that are everywhere on my Instagram, on my TikTok, on my Facebook, everywhere I see. My heart struggles with this. And then, having conversations with some friends. I have a friend who their children go to a Spanish immersion school, and there was actually a Star Tribune article that talked a little bit about the incident, but I showed up and unclear a little bit about how exactly it went down, but somebody entered the school and said, "We hit this teacher's car. Can she come out?" And she came out and she was detained. A Spanish speaking individual. She's a U.S. citizen. She was only briefly detained. She was released, but this happened at the daycare. There's things happening near schools. The kids' parts of it. My kids are young enough to not know what's going on, and I don't always ascribe to the white privilege, but I feel like I sit up here in my cushy little suburb and haven't had to pass by any of these incidences and see anything at a gas station or a store or anything, and it's just really hard to see what is going on and to see how this is the way to go about it. I will also say that there's that if you have heard it, the Mr. Rogers quote that he said, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" And to this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing there are so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. And so I just want to give a little shout out to my friend in this situation at this school. Again, kids going to Spanish immersion school. There are Spanish speaking families, Spanish speaking teachers. And we are seeing a lot of, I would say, again, I'm not the expert, but from what I have seen on my social media, some profiling of Black and Brown individuals, of non-native English speakers. And some of these families are petrified to send their children to school. Their children take buses, or they take buses to get their kids to school. So friends like mine have stepped up, are carpooling, are bringing teachers in to do their jobs, are bringing kids in to get educated because their families fear for them getting there by themselves. So they're depending on white Caucasian individuals to help them do that. And then she also has a fear of, is she putting her family in risk by trying to do the good thing and teach them about supporting their school community and supporting their school family? It's a really tough, unfortunate situation, and it's where I struggle with my head and heart, because I see, as I very clearly, passionately feel, the illegal criminals need to get out of here. We need to have more coordination. We need to fix our broken immigration system. But I struggle with what looks like some profiling. I struggle with U.S. citizens being detained or being stopped and asking to prove themselves because they are not white. And I struggle with me sitting up here comfortable and safe and not having to deal with that, where there are also individuals who are not white individuals but are U.S. citizens, were born here, or immigrated here legally, who are having to fear to go to the gas station or grocery store, and what that looks like. And I'll end my rant with, I'm just sad. I'm just sad because I want there to be that middle ground where we can make our streets safer by taking illegal immigrants who are here and have been violating the law and committing crimes of all sorts of different levels to be deported. But I also think that there are a lot of really good people who are here, and we don't have enough time to get into it, but there's obviously going to be also an impact in a lot of different industries and Minnesota's economy, I feel and fear, and I don't know that that's talked about, but I just am questioning how this is lawful, how this falls under our due process and our constitutional rights that folks have, and again, it's just the optics of seeing how some of these individuals are treated is heartbreaking. So my rant is over. I just am a little sad, and my heart is a little heavy about watching this, but it's also hard to not.
I'm really sorry, but I'm also really proud of you for sharing that with us. I think it's important that we hear this. I think it's really difficult to listen to, but it's really important to listen to. And I appreciate you sharing it. And I also appreciate you stepping up and being a helper and making sure that people are being helped. I think what you just articulated, the heart versus mind, is where a lot of us are. Where I think where the solution will lie, Becky. That's where I think it is. And I feel I mean, that's just really tough to hear. But I think there's a lot of people out there, and this is where I think you and I do have a privilege and an opportunity to speak up. And this is the most important thing that we can do is to, number one, elevate voices, make sure we're having balanced, thoughtful discussions. And then number two, sharing our own perspectives, because I think more of us need to have a responsibility to speak up and not to be silent on this. I share the same concerns from a similar perspective, but not knowing the exact situation that you're dealing with. This is not sustainable. It's not in any way, shape, or form. There's a better way to do this. And there's a smarter way to do it, and that's going to require everyone working together. But getting into some of these protests, which I want to discuss a little bit, just want to kind of lay the table on, is that I am a First Amendment absolutist. I'm a strong advocate in the First Amendment. And I will tell you that as someone who is a passionate advocate for the First Amendment, who's gone to court for the rights of journalists and has won cases on the First Amendment and the importance of expressing your rights, there is a balance that needs to be struck. And again, there's a difference. I'll share just a couple asides on some things. One of the challenges that I see is I understand what the governor is saying when he says, go out and record. Right. The problem is that's not what people are doing. It's important to document. You know what I would have preferred the governor said? ICE needs to have body cameras. And I'm going to work with our federal partners to ensure that there's body cameras and there's a records retention policy for body cameras. Because you know what's better than having citizens out there recording these situations is if law enforcement was recording them with the available technology. Now, that being said, I don't want to take anything away from citizens exercising their First Amendment right to record and observe. But I just want to be clear with what I just said. Record and observe. When you go from recording to observing to impeding and involving yourself in the story, that's where it becomes problematic. And that is the balance that I don't think is being struck. And that's what's not being dialed in. And that's where I'm so very frustrated with the rhetoric from both sides on this. And I think there's an opportunity to pause some of that rhetoric and do things, because there's a big difference. Let me make sure I'm clear about something. I have had interactions with law enforcement over my years. Very recently, I had a conversation with law enforcement about an issue, and I made it very clear to them that I was not happy. Have I raised my voice with law enforcement? Absolutely. Have I swore at law enforcement? No question I have. But in the conversation with them, I remember saying the power dynamic, what I'm pissed off about and what I'm angry about is you hold all the cards. And I verbalize that. But I will say to you, as a parent, I'm trying to, again, being a First Amendment absolutist, there's boundaries. There's things you can't do. I have said to my kids as they start to drive into things, the side of the road is not the place to argue with a police officer about a ticket. Have I had interactions? I have had multiple interactions with law enforcement over my career, my life, personal and professional, where I've been frustrated with police. And I have found a way to speak up about that. I've written about it, I've spoken about it, but also in those communications, I have to recognize that there is a line between me expressing my rights and me getting in their face to a point where they feel threatened. And right now, though, that line there is no line. When the governor goes out and says, go out and document, what people I think mistakenly are hearing or want to hear is go out there and protest. And that's the truth of it. We have agitators on both sides. And I said this to a state representative I spoke to this week. I am convinced that there are agitators on both sides who want to see Minneapolis and Minnesota burn. And I think that is sad, but that is where we're at. And if there's not some responsible restraint, more people are going to get hurt. Now, I understand that is maybe romantic and idealistic to some people to have that type of protest, but I will remind your listeners, you have a constitutional right to peaceably assemble. Civil disobedience can also be peaceful, nonviolent. I am seeing way too much violence, way too much in your face, and I don't like it. Here's the blunt reality, and push back on this. It's not equal. When I'm having a conversation with law enforcement and I'm pissed off about something, people need to recognize they have more legal rights than I do in that situation. I don't have a right to grapple with them and hold them and restrain them. They can do some of that stuff with me. And so the dynamic that's being set up is we have the federal government and ICE agents coming in, and it's just this conflict that is ensuing every day, and it has to stop. But I think people need to recognize that you have a right to peaceably assemble. You have a right to record. You have a right to document and observe. But when you impede a federal law enforcement investigation, or when you impede law enforcement action, that is going to lead to conflict. And the federal government has all of the cards on their side, just as the state would if I got pulled over by a state patrol and I was frustrated with what I saw. The state patrol has latitude. So do county, and so do city. And so what I would remind your listeners, as someone who considers himself a First Amendment absolutist, who's gone to court, has advocated very extensively, there is a lot of shit I'm seeing on TV that is not protected First Amendment activity. And as much as you don't want to believe that, it is. Stop giving them a reason to do what they want to do. And exercise your First Amendment rights. Record, document, get angry. Get angry, be angry, use your voice. But do not impede lawful law enforcement activity, because it is only going to lead to more people getting hurt. And we can talk about what the solution is, but the power dynamic I want to be clear about is that when someone impedes a law enforcement investigation in any type of way, when they're lawfully out there doing something, people are going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I kind of, even to tie that back to my previous rant, that we don't see the full context of these situations, right? But we know that there's some sort of cyclical issues going on here where there's people poking the bear and the bear's reacting back, and then it fires up the poker, and it just keeps going and going and going. And again, not necessarily somebody that I always back what he says, but Vice President J.D. Vance tweeted this week, "You are only seeing chaotic ICE raids in blue sanctuary cities where local officials are fighting against federal law enforcement. The chaos is created by those leaders who would rather promote rioting in the streets than follow the law." And I do think there is something to that. I do think that there are those situations where, because of what we're seeing, and then not being cohesive, not collaborating, not working together, that there are these individuals who feel emboldened by what they're hearing from their Democratic elected officials and feel like they can go and scream and throw things and shout, and whether it's fireworks or a water bottle or whatever, throwing at ICE agents and blocking their cars, and when, again, in these situations, maybe some of them are not warranted, like I said, of some that we don't know, but of stopping people that might be U.S. citizens or might just be a mom and dad who are here illegally. But some of those we know, with 1,000 criminal illegal immigrants that have been deported, we know that a lot of those interactions are getting to criminals, and they are being impeded of trying to get some of these criminals off our street. And so I'm with you. I support the right to do that, but it has gone too far, and I feel like some of the protesters, if not all of the protesters, feel as though the words and thoughts that they are getting from their elected leaders allow them to act as such.
Correct. There is also a distinction between what is being said in press conferences and what is being put out as guidance from cities. The city of Minneapolis put out some guidance, do's and don'ts, immediately in the aftermath of the horrific and tragic shooting of Renee Goode. And one of the don'ts was, don't impede traffic. Don't block freeways and thoroughfares and things like that. Don't do that. The city of Minneapolis also made it clear when they were messaging on their lawsuit that they want legal law enforcement legal ICE immigration enforcement, and they want legal immigration enforcement, but they don't want some of this tactics. You know what would be helpful is rather than fomenting a mob and then just telling them to go out in the streets, talk more about what they should be doing. And I think, sadly, as I say that, I think that opportunity may have passed, because I do think there needs to be a calming down of things. And I think people need to be talking less about going out because people are going to get hurt. And I get it. I'm going to hear from people saying, well, this is, we shouldn't be silent. There are a lot of things that you could do to legitimately influence ICE policy that would be helpful, more than just protesting and screaming at an ICE agent. And you want to know why I'm saying that? Because I'm just going to get into this now. I'm going to say this something that I've been sitting on, and I just want to remind our listeners that this is my take. Disagree with me. Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about Minnesota. He has lost this state 3 times, contrary to what he says. He has lost this state when he has ran for president. He has never won this state. Minnesota, I believe, is being used only from this perspective. He is showing force in Minnesota, not to benefit local Republicans, but to show his strength and what he can do. He is making an example out of Minnesota. And to think that Donald Trump is going to be involved in cleaning up this state when it's all gone, when it's all a mess, is ridiculous. I don't think he is doing things to benefit the long-term growth of this state in terms of helping Republicans. I don't think he gives a thought about how his policy is going to help or hurt Republicans. He is going to do what he wants to do. I want to be clear that until people recognize who they're dealing with and what his objective is, I don't think this is going to get solved. But I just want to dispel anyone of the belief that I think Donald Trump cares about making Minnesota better. Minnesota is an opportunity for Donald Trump to push and show that he has force and power as the president of the United States. That is what he's showing. Because if he was concerned about how this would be going over in the state, he would be engaging more with, I think, leaders, posting less. He believes he's the savior of this state. And this is a show of force by him. And so for Republicans who want to go lockstep with him and say, we're going to support the president, we're going to go along with him, just know that you're going along with someone who is using this state to show his power and to use it as an example of what not to do in other states, more than I think he's concerned about making Minnesota some place where thoughtful Republicans or Republicans like him can succeed. Because if this continues, there's not going to be any opportunity for Minnesota Republicans.
I do not disagree. I think that is very well said, very articulate, and I hope others take heed, listen, and act accordingly. I do want to, just with a couple minutes left here, chat a little bit through maybe some proposed solutions, our goal, our dream solutions. I think we've talked about a little bit of it. I think the joint investigation, I think, is a start. I think cooperation with those criminals detained is another one, or working like they did Democratic Governor Whitmer in Michigan, and working with those, the list of criminals that ICE and DHS are working off of, I think should be one. But I'm curious from your perspective, if you have any other, what would both sides attribute as a win? What would they see as an acceptable loss? And who do you think, $1 million question, is going to be the person or people or group of individuals to broker some sort of negotiation here? Because it's not sustainable, but some sort of negotiation, conversation, plan needs to be worked out.
I don't know who can broker it, but someone needs to do something. I think one of the challenges is that I think that Governor Walz and the President of the United States, Donald Trump, do not have a healthy, positive working relationship. I don't think that they like each other. And I don't think they like each other at all. And I think that that has a huge impact on that. I think that this is punitive for the president, and I think it may be punitive. The response from the governor may be punitive. I do not like having I do not like the governor having a statewide press conference and saying what he said, and the next day posting some graphic on social media saying, "Can't we get along?" I will tell you
Thank
again.
you. Yes.
I think it makes no sense. This is going to be solved by people picking up the phone and talking to each other. If I was the governor of the state, I would be getting the state plane. I would be getting the attorney general, the mayor of Minneapolis, the mayor of St. Paul, and I'd be flying out to Washington, D.C., and I would be meeting with the president and trying to resolve this. I think one of the problems that we have here, Becky, is that I think Minneapolis, I'm going to focus more on Minneapolis, but I think Minneapolis has operated in a universe where they thought they could ignore the president. The president is not going to be ignored. And all sides need to recognize that the president has a role in this. And the quicker people recognize that the federal government has a role, the better off this is going to be. There are legitimate issues involving federalism and states' rights that should be explored. But the bottom line is the president of the United States has more tools, weapons, and infrastructure in his disposal to make Minnesota suffer in this situation. And sure, it's very idealistic and romantic for people to talk about going to the streets and fighting back on this. But I'm going to tell you something. It's not going to be some of the people that are weaponizing some of this rhetoric that it's going to get hurt. It's going to be people like you discussed, Becky, people that you know, and other people that are getting hurt. And I don't want to see that happen. And so politics is the art of compromise. And I think the best thing that could happen is get the state plane, get the Minneapolis police chief, get the mayor of Minneapolis, the mayor of St. Paul, the attorney general, and fly out to Washington, meet with the president, and have conversations about how there can be legitimate compromise and work together. Because this can't be solved any other way. You cannot have policy positions that ignore the role of the federal government. Likewise, the federal government can't ignore the role of cities and states. But I'm going to tell you something. If anyone has the trump card in this, it's the president. The president has the biggest chip in this. And I understand that. And I say that as someone who has never voted for him, who didn't want him to be reelected, and as someone who discussed with you, Becky, his immigration policy and how unrealistic it was going to be to implement it, understanding that is the dynamic. I believe once the governor, they understand that there has to be a reality check. And I think that if we can find a way for the governor, the mayor, the city council, the chief of police, everyone to coordinate better, this will get solved. But that is going to require compromise and people acknowledging that everyone has a voice in the room.
Do you think, well, before my take, I have a follow-up question. Do you think that had Governor Walz still be running for re-election, the response and reaction in language and rhetoric would be different?
I will tell you something, that he's pissed off.
I think both have nothing to lose right now, right?
Correct.
I mean,
he's pissed off.
Obviously, I think that Trump has midterms to worry about, but like you said, he has the bigger Trump card here, and I think that with Walz at this point, I mean, obviously they're seeing the polling, so they see those numbers, but he doesn't have an election, riding his back.
One of the things I'm going to go back to, Becky, is our conversation about when we had that bonus episode talking about when Walz announced he wasn't running. I said in that episode, we are going to find out what the power is of a lame-term governor. He is now, a lame duck governor. He is now a lame duck governor. We are getting a sense as to what he's going to do, and he is not going to go away quietly. I think he's pissed off. I'm not saying he doesn't have a right to be, but he's pissed off. Right. Okay. And you know what it's not good to do is to lead when you're pissed off like this. And so, again, my solution is get on the state plane, get on the phone, and get out there. Stop having press conferences saying one thing and then posting little cute graphics saying, can't we all get along? Doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
Yep.
And so that's what I want to see happening.
Right as we were logging on to record this episode, we saw a press release from retiring Minnesota State Senator Jeremy Miller, former president of the Senate, one of my favorite senators. He offered to broker a meeting between President Donald Trump and Governor Walz in an effort to restore civility and end the escalating crisis in Minnesota. And I gotta say, while I don't know who's the best to broker it, he is somebody I would put on the short list here. I think he was the chair of the Purple Caucus, I think they called themselves. He has been a pragmatic Republican leader. I think he has been thoughtful. I think he has been critical at times of Republican policies and stances. And just want to read a couple lines from here. He said, I'm hearing from folks across the state and beyond who have significant concerns about the massive fraud taking place. I'm hearing from folks who have significant concerns with criminals not being held responsible for their actions. I'm hearing from folks who have significant concerns with the number of individuals who are in the state illegally, especially those committing crimes. The problem is there has been too much blaming, too many excuses, but no answers, no accountability, and definitely not enough cooperation. I encourage you to go read the full thing, but it ends with President Trump, Governor Walz, let's get together to figure out a plan to dial back the rhetoric and stop the madness. It's time for more cooperation and less conflict. It's time for solutions. I love it.
I love it. Bravo to Senator Miller. Thank you for doing that. And that's the type of outside the box diplomacy that's going to do it. That's exactly it. I am so proud of him doing that. That takes risks. That is, and he should be applauded for thinking outside the box, offering himself up to be in that role. Because I guarantee you, he's going to get a lot of heat for doing that. To think that is a position to be in, I applaud him. We need more of it. I hope it is accepted. I hope he is embraced. And if there is anyone in the legislature on the Republican side who I think could be a thoughtful advocate for resolving this, Senator Miller is top on the list.
Fantastic. We're not going to have a solution today or tomorrow, but we'll certainly continue to cover it as it goes, as negotiations and conversations hopefully happen sooner than later, and as any incidents and protests and hopefully nothing dangerous or violent occur over the weekend. I hope we have a nice, quiet, cold little weekend and everybody stays inside and stays safe.
It's not going to happen. It's going to be ugly this weekend. There's going to be some protests and I'm worried about them. And as much as I don't want to step on your enthusiasm, but I just
like to dream and hope and wish.
Yeah,
right?
I know. No, I really appreciate this discussion. And we're going to get to a sensitive part of the podcast now that might be.
I was hoping we'd forget it and punt it another week.
A little tough, but no, we have to acknowledge this. Go ahead. You can lead this part.
Our football season is over.
Yes.
Can we just end it there?
No, it's not. Yes. A couple big developments. Kevin Poindexter came from behind.
Crushed it.
Yes. I mean, the only thing that's fallen faster than ICE approval ratings is Golnick's play on the field. Great work by Kevin Poindexter. By the way, in the interest of excitement, a trophy was ordered, and there'll be a private, dignified ceremony where it will be passed in the coming week or so. I will acknowledge, as a person who designed it, our names are on there too for other victories. And I'm really excited about it, but congratulations to Kevin.
Yes.
For his resounding victory. And it was Kevin won, Ben Golnick second. Julius, that sneaky little bastard, found time from engaging in acts of disobedience and somewhat civil disobedience to come in third. And I think, did you finish in last?
No, I tied for fifth.
So it was a win for me. What was my objective?
I know. You won by 1 point.
And that's all that matters.
It is all that matters. A shout out real quick, pulling this up. Kevin, the last 2 weeks, week 17, he gained 4 points on Golnick, and week 18, he gained 3 points. So in those last 2 weeks, had a 7-point swing. Golnick was in first almost the entire time. Pretty impressive work there to close things out. So KP, nice work.
Yeah, and I'll just say,
and you too, bravo. Congratulations on your 4th place victory.
I beat you.
You did.
And a couple of things. One thing, without violating too much confidence, Ben isn't happy. Ben isn't happy. The other thing is, I want to just say, just a little housekeeping. I won my family fantasies football league.
Bravo.
There is also a trophy coming for me that might be a little bit more in the face, because I wanted to be dignified with our podcast.
Sure.
The other thing I needed to clean up was an incident involving me getting locked in the shower. Received some pushback on that. I needed to clarify. There was not a lock so just let's go back to Christmas. We've had a lot of breaking news, so just give me a second on this. Christmas, I was with my in-laws out of state, and I got locked into a shower. I was asked to disclose that there was not a lock on the shower. This isn't some dungeon. I had gotten the slide off its track, or the door off its track, so it was user error on my part. And so I just wanted to clarify, no, there isn't a lock. I was a part of the problem, but once again, I'm really appreciative of my brother-in-law, Greg, for saving me like Kevin Costner in The Bodyguard. So it was just wonderful.
Thank you for that update.
Yes, and I just want to thank you for this will likely be our longest episode, but we needed to do this. And I just wanted to say thank you. You really, once again, just laid this out and shared some really important stories and perspectives, and I'm really proud of what we've done here today.
Well, thank you. It was a good conversation. I was excited to chat with you, and I'm hopeful and optimistic, but also think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So stay safe and be as happy. Find your happiness.
That's right. I want to thank Becky and all of our listeners for joining us on this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Everyone, please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.